Well, good.
Which part?
Is there anywhere I can connect to the shared drive?
I can't fix this right now.
Okay.
I have to start the live stream, I'm sorry.
Okay, alright, get back.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna, cause it's on the shared drive, so I gotta go in there.
Okay.
Somehow get it on the thumb drive, so somehow.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it's our meeting.
I see a little red light. Is it working? Yes, it's working. Oh, but the screen.
That's the 6th Avenue design. It's on 2 lines. 6th Avenue design year and master plan project 11, those are really the same thing on 2 different lines. Yeah. Okay, okay, wait a minute. It's okay. Is it okay?
Yeah, sure. Technical
I
wait.
forgot my footstool.
We got one somewhere.
Brandon brought one last time that I rejected, but
So Richard, is there a footstool underneath you? No.
We'll wait a minute to start the meeting while we take care of some technical issues.
thanks. We went down to Deachin's for breakfast for the first time in years.
It's a full service, this is a full service apartment.
We're waiting for technical one. We're good. We, I'm using this one. We good? Hey, we good?
Yes, sir, I was trying to get a footstool for.
Yeah. There you go. Karen,
Thank you very much.
full service.
Name please here.
All righty, it is slightly after 3. The footstool has arrived for Councilmember Ferlito. I think we're all comfortable, well situated. I'll call to order the special council meeting, Carmel-by-the-Sea City Council for March 22nd, 2022. Could I get a roll call, please?
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Councilmember Barron.
Here.
Councilmember Ferlito.
Present.
Councilmember Tice.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Richards.
Here.
And Mayor Potter.
Here.
All are present. We have a quorum.
All right, our first item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Councilmember Tice, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Absolutely. All rise. Ready, begin. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Oops. All righty, first order of business then is public appearance. It's an item for any member of the public to speak on an item that is not on tonight's agenda. There's a 3-minute limitation on testimony. If you'd state your name for the record, I'd appreciate it. Is there anybody wishing to testify tonight?
Is it on Zoom?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Anybody in the public present wishing to speak? Anybody on Zoom wishing to speak out in Zoom land? I'm not seeing anybody. I'll close the public comment period and then move on to tonight's business. First order of business, our only order of business, is to receive a presentation on proposed fiscal year 2022-23 capital improvement program and a 5-year capital improvement plan. Provide direction to staff. Chip, would you like to kick this off?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council. Thank you to everyone who's attending today. This is your first blush review at our draft CIP for fiscal year 22-23. The first thing, of course, that you'll notice is there is a significant delta between the available funds this fiscal year and the number of projects and the dollar amount that we've estimated at this point in time. These are not unfounded estimates. They're good estimates, but of course we won't know the true price on these items until we drill down a little bit further and get additional information for you. We do have some limited tools that can help close that delta at your directions. That's what we're looking for in part tonight. By way of background, we have made an offer to a project manager. Mr. Harari will be back full-time next week. We're working with Mr. Muir to see if what his availability is to stay on with us. He's done a fantastic job in Mr. Harari's absence. Mr. Muir has hired a contract project manager to do some work, and again, we're looking for additional solutions to move these projects forward. That said, in spite of the pandemic, we have gotten 17 projects together, completed this fiscal year so far, and again, Mr. Muir will touch on that in his presentation. This has been a team effort, so I wanted to thank Agnes and Bob and Ashley and certainly Robin and everyone else who pitched in, Max, on what you see before you, the entire executive team. So we'll go through it, and we can answer any questions that you certainly have. But again, we are looking for your direction. It's a red light, green light. You're not approving anything per se tonight. You're just giving us direction. We'll come back, I think, on May 5th, Robin, and we've got a council meeting on that. I think it's May.
Staff will return on April 5th meeting to refine the potential project based on comments received March 22nd.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're correct, Mr. Mayor. The operating budget will be revealed to you in draft on May 5th, and then we've got a budget workshop the week of the 15th. So Robin, when she gets up here in a minute, she'll ask you to look at your calendars for the week of May 15th for a convenient meeting time to look at the budget. So that concludes my introductory comments. I can answer any questions, or we can go to Mr. Muir.
Any questions by council before I go to Fred? Fred, I don't see any. The floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. A couple of things to start with. The team is both seen and unseen. Bob is watching and is available to answer the hard questions. That was not the part of his brain that was removed. He set all of the hard questions ready for answered. And he very much participated in this, right down to looking at those final council recommendations on the last slide. So he's here to come in as we need him. Agnes has just been a war horse in terms of putting all the things together, because the things are continually moving right up until 3 minutes before this meeting started, when I was talking to the architect on the police department building. So it's a continually moving train, and there are so many unknowns in these days. It makes it even doubly difficult. And then Robin, of course, will be here to help us with the numbers. As Chip said in the beginning, this is more like a concept meeting. We're not going to drill down, at least we don't plan on drilling down into the depths of projects, because many of these projects are defined by not much more than a couple of sentences in a CIP because of the lack of capacity on the part of the council and the city over the last few years. Part of this project, or the set of projects being recommended, is to rebuild both the physical capacity in terms of the drawings and better analysis of the projects, as well as the human capacity to do the work that you want to get done. As Chip said, and we'll go into more detail in terms of a listing of the projects, a lot of folks probably will not realize how many projects have actually been completed this year, but needless to say, there are an awful lot that still need to be approved. So it's very much a team effort. We're going to be looking at concepts, and this is just one piece of a greater whole. As I was trying to put this together, I tried to go back and listen to what I heard you folks say individually and collectively at your strategy session. What did you have in your mind's eye? I heard you talking about the climate action plan. I heard concern expressed about the working conditions of the employees. I heard concerns expressed about the lack of employees in some disciplines. So I've tried to integrate all of that into what I think you collectively said. What I'm hoping at the end of this is to tell us whether we got it right or wrong. Did we accurately capture your priorities? Because your priorities ultimately drive what we bring back to you in a very short amount of time to start trying to hone this list of projects down to something manageable. One part of being managed is, of course, having the money to buy it at the time, because the costs are escalating so very, very rapidly. And the other part is having the capacity in the city, or hiring the capacity to actually develop the projects to get them to you. So that's the strategy, that's the overview, that's kind of what we want to touch base. Are we doing the right thing? This is a piece of your overall budget. Some things that may be burning a hole in your heart or your constituents' heart because they don't like this or that may be covered in the operating budget as part of what streets does or parks does and so on. And of course, some will be in the capital budget that we have here. So with that introduction, you want to talk about money resources?
Thank you, Fred. This is just a real high-level snapshot of the budget that we're looking at for 22-23. And like I said, it's high-level staff, administration, finance department, and even all of the departments of the city. We're still working on the numbers. But we're still, like I said, these are very educated numbers that we're putting in here to show as far as building a balanced budget, meaning revenues equal expenditures, could have a basically a 1.8 million CIP plan for the year. So general guidelines there. And again, just as Fred said, these are for general guidelines to help your discussion tonight and the direction you're going to provide to staff. I do give assurance that, as Chip said, we will be bringing very detailed operating budgets to you, first view at your May 4th council meeting, and then there will be a detailed budget workshop. So please don't think that this is all you're going to see for 22-23. But with that said, so looking at a 1.8, and also a reminder that your council has fund balance, which is the savings of unspent funds from prior fiscal year's budgets that are completely at your council's discretion to use as you like, which can be putting more into the CIP for the year. At this point, there are roughly about $7 million that your council could consider combining with the current fiscal year revenues. So, like I said, I know that's very high level, but again, just kind of some general guideline to guide your council's discussion tonight.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, kind of reinforce what Robin said here. So again, fund balance is like a savings account. It does not include money that we have in our strategic reserves. So I would direct everyone's attention, in your budget book that you received, there's a table called projected revenue balance. This is this is what we adopted last June. But again, the fund balance that Robin is talking about, in the general fund, we are projecting at the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th, about a $4.4 million fund balance for the general fund. That's, again, savings. We're projecting about a $2.5 million, a $2 million fund balance in our hostelry fund. And again, that does not include the hostelry reserve. We have to have a TOT reserve, but that does not include that. That's about, again, $2 million. And then in our local measure, our sales tax measure, which is Measure C, we are projecting about a $1.3 million surplus. All told, it's about $7 million. We think that's a pretty good number. Again, as always, I don't have a crystal ball. We don't have crystal balls. We're doing our best to estimate where we are. I talked to the hospitality, the innkeepers, and again, we're having a very strong March. So if this continues, perhaps our ending year balance will be greater than $19,445, which Robin is showing right here. And of course, that's a good thing. That means we're ending the fiscal year in the black, and the ending year balance rolls into our fund balance, into its respective categories. We do not know, Council. I think Brandon calls it revenge spending. And I like that term very much. We are seeing historic high daily overnight rates in our hotels. We are seeing very, very strong occupancy through periods where there's a little bit less occupancy typically. So we don't know whether this euphoria, this euphoric spending will be maintained. So again, the budget that I'll be presenting, that the team and I will be presenting to you, will remain conservative. That said, of course, you have the power of the purse. I'm the Federal Reserve, you're Congress, you have the power of the purse, you get to tell me how much you want to spend, and again, we'll respond accordingly. This is one of my favorite charts that we produce. And I would just point a couple things out to you. Even though our pension bond, do we have can you show the pension bond going away in 23-24, Robin? Can you use the mouse maybe and just roll over that number? Can you do that? Thank you. Agnes, thank you. It's a zero. So again, we've got one more bond payment next year of $701,000. Then it goes away. In spite of that, in the out years, we begin to grow a relatively large deficit balance, which in 27-28 is in excess of $3 million at this point in time. So how do we balance that budget? Well, first of all, this budget is assuming about a 5% revenue increase on the major revenue sources. Those are our transit occupancy tax, our traditional Bradley-Burns sales tax, Measure C sales tax, and of course, property tax. The challenge with, of course, on the expenditure side of filling positions is our expenditures go up as well. Our insurance goes up, our PERS liability goes up as well. And unfortunately, the revenue and the expenditure growth are not, they're not in concert with each other. The revenue lags that of our expenditures because of how expensive it is to do business, not just in the capital world, but again, of having employees. So again, it's not too many years out that we could have a deficit balance and have to either use fund balance to balance the budget at the end of the fiscal year, or find an alternative revenue source. And of course, 2 weeks ago, you did direct that we look at paid parking as a way of managing our visitors, but also looking at that as a revenue source. So again, a very important chart. You'll see it change. You'll see it change in just a couple of weeks. But this is, again, the touchstone that we use to project what's happening in the future. And one final note, I will remind you that in 2020, when the pandemic hit, 2 years ago right now, when hospitality collapsed because visitation was restricted because of the pandemic, we were forced to use $1.7 million of hostelry fund balance to balance the budget. So again, it's $7 million may sound like a lot of money to have in savings, but it's pretty precarious when your burn rate is about $2 million a month. So thank you for letting me talk about this again. I know I talk about it a little bit ad nauseum, and it's somewhat nauseating sometimes, but again, I've always committed to you to present a balanced, conservative budget, and that's what you have before you. So happy to answer any questions. Yes, ma'am.
Gary?
So, when you look at the capital outlay, but figures there, they don't match the chart we're looking at, the big chart here,
That's correct.
after the first year. So, help me out with the
Yeah.
incongruency of that.
Yeah, so what we're budgeting here is we're arguing that we have $1.8 million available for capital work next year. The wish list, if you will, the list we're presenting to you is, what is it, Robin? What is the city?
4.7.
Yeah, what's the city portion? 3.8. So again, that's a $3 million delta. That's the delta I was talking about in my opening remarks. So again, there are two ways of dealing with this. One is to delve into fund balance to say that these projects are so important. And again, Mr. Muir is going to talk about our infrastructure and building maintenance. Nothing that's new to you. Again, we inherited an infrastructure imbalance in the fact that we weren't maintaining our buildings and our properties and our beach and our pathways and our parks at the same level we should be. And as you know, if you don't change the oil in your car, it's going to break down. It's going to cost a lot more than the $39.99 oil change, and that's not what we've been doing in the distant past. In the recent past, you have been, but again, we're still dealing with this deficit. So the other option, of course, is to ratchet back the number of capital projects until you get to $1.8 million. There's probably a sweet spot in between those two things. So again, what we're looking for tonight is your direction. There are no bad projects on the CIP list. They're all necessary. They're all important. It's really a matter of us talking about them and for you to give us direction on the most important.
Any other questions of Chip? Jeff?
Thank you. I have two questions, Robin. On the sales tax lines, on the Bradley Burns and the local sales tax lines, so the local is Measure D, right? And the Bradley
C.
Burns, Measure C.
Measure C, correct.
And the Bradley Burns is the tax we get back from the state. Mm-hmm. Is the Bradley Burns tax like a fixed percentage of the sales that happen inside Carmel, or is it more complicated than that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, ma'am. I'm
Well,
sorry, I
you-
apologize.
Right,
Sorry, I was looking at him, but talking to you. My apologies.
No, yes, it is, it's a little more complicated than that. And
Robin,
to
can you
get-
just get a little closer to the microphone? I'm sorry,
And to
please.
get those values, we actually work with HDL, our sales tax consultant. And so they analyze the industry and all the components that affect industry and sales and travel and everything. So those are really not necessarily percentages. We work with guidance from HDL.
So my question is,
It's a shared tax, sir.
so my question is, between 21-22 and 22-23, the Bradley Burns number goes up by only $70,000, but the local tax number goes up by $800,000. What explains the sort of, I would expect to see like $500,000 and $800,000.
Yeah, as Chip said, as far as the Bradley Burns being shared, and of course then the local really staying everything happening here comes directly at a higher percentage to the city. And again, HDL works very detailed into how they analyze all the components.
Well, Mr.
Okay,
Barron,
I'll come back.
I would suggest that we sit down with Robin and our
Okay.
newest colleague, Russell in the back. Thank you for joining us, Russell, working with us now. And we can show the math.
And then what's the reason for the decline in other revenues? Was there some other revenues number? Oh, that must have been the funds from the federal government.
Right, there are
That's-
things in there that drop off things, we don't have parklet revenue, and there are various
Okay.
elements of
Thank
going
you.
down. But again, I give assurance that as we get into the actual budget discussion and budget workshops, we will go into detail for everything for you,
Okay.
okay?
So Chip, if I might, for the public, could you explain what the function of a strategic reserve is and what the state, what the norm is for a city to maintain its strategic reserves and what the purpose of that fund is?
Yes, sir. So we have a policy, a council policy. Our old policy was that you would have in our strategic reserve, our general fund reserve, 10% of the general fund. You had the wherewithal, and you did a great job last year, council. You raised it to 15%. So, for example, 10% of 28 million is 2.8 million, and what you have this fiscal year raising by to 15% is 3.3 or 3.4 million.
And the purpose of the strategic reserve is?
It's once you've burned through your fund balance, it's a pandemic, it's a major fire, flood, where our revenue sources are eviscerated for longer than the pandemic. It's a long, ongoing onslaught, and it's to keep the city going for all intents and purposes.
Thank you, appreciate that. I wanted the public to understand that. Any other questions? Karen?
Yes, under charges for services, when was the last time that we reviewed those charges for services, and are they on par with other cities in the peninsula? Because it seems like that doesn't grow very much.
That's a great question. If I may, Robin, so a couple years ago, we updated our charges for we actually, just a couple years ago, and then we've got a factor by which we increase the charges for services on an annual basis by CPI or inflation, consumer price index. So rather than having them lag for several years, council member behind, we have an automatic adjustment every year, and you approve that as part of your budget cycle.
And am I correct?
But my question was, are we up to what other communities are?
Yeah, we can't compare ourselves to other communities, ma'am. What we can do is we cannot make a profit.
Okay. So
So what we can do is we pay for the level of effort of our employees, which is the legal threshold under which we can charge fees. So to answer your question, yes, ma'am. But I think what you'll find is that those are pretty consistent with certainly our neighboring agencies as well.
Karen, is
Yes,
that
and
good?
excuse me, then every 3 years, we have a consultant who's hired that fully analyzes our fees and everything that goes into all the staffing and overhead. And then so every 3 years, there's more of a higher bump, tends to be more of a higher bump in fees. But like Chip said, every fiscal year, they come to your council for approval.
Bobby?
No, I don't have anything, Mayor, other than that was one of our big meetings when we went over all those, and we had to go over every item, like they wanted to charge $25 for the high heel permit. And we had to say, no, that's a little bit high for that. And so it was a big debate on every one of those fees, the track ones, the track twos. And so I think that we're pretty well in line now, aren't we, Chip?
Yes, sir, I believe so.
Yeah.
Right, it's a 3-year cycle, so we will be on our third cycle to simply bump up by CPI, yes. And then, exactly, so in the following fiscal year, 23-24 will be the time period to have our consultant come in and analyze everything from the ground up.
Are there any other questions of staff by council members regarding the budget? All right, I don't see any. We'll proceed with the presentation then?
Okay, thank you, Council.
No, not this part. I'll open it down.
This slide is probably the single most important slide to see, is this really what your strategy is? This is what I tried to capture of what I thought your strategy was. I heard you clearly say that you wanted your facilities to be well-maintained and that you wanted us to get after it, so to speak, in terms of getting these projects done, particularly those that are dealing with facilities that are beyond their lifespan or that are inadequately serving the mission they're supposed to serve the community. So you see that reflected in some of our projects. The next issue I heard a couple of you say very, very clearly about, that after seeing the workspace, working conditions of many of the employees, that they were unacceptable, that those should be addressed. And in many ways, that was at the heart of expanding the thought about what would be done at the police department, both for the police officers, but also for the public receiving police services when they get there, as well as expanding the facilities available to the public that were first class and functional to meet a wide range of things. So that became our touchstone as we're actually applying it to a specific project, but that would be applied to all of the projects. There were a number of comments about grants that we were going to lose if we didn't get them executed, or level of effort or maintenance of effort concerns in some cases. So those have to be a high priority, because we always want to pay for things with somebody else's money whenever possible, because that in the end game really sets you up to receive even more of other people's money by successfully executing grants that you can demonstrate your capability to put money to work. So those were some important touchstones that you'll see throughout the projects listed in the CIP. The next one is, I'll call it my words for what I think I heard from you, and that was somewhat of an exasperation, and I expect to hear similar exasperation today as we go through these numbers. As Chip said, they aren't numbers that we picked out of the air, but I wouldn't take them to the bank because they are very, very preliminary numbers in terms of, okay, we've got a description here of what we think the project is going to be, but we really, really haven't analyzed it. So part of that, particularly the maintenance ones, are tied to the fact that you haven't done what I would call a facilities component inspection of each of your major buildings in a very long time. So the numbers that Harrison Associates put it together for you many years ago, the numbers that they have are no longer valid, totally invalid. But as individual property owners, you know the importance of asset management. You know the importance of routinely reinvesting in your asset to keep it first class. That's the same mindset that I'm suggesting we instill here in terms of updating the facilities component inspection, so you have a better sense of what is needed and how much it's going to cost at the time the inspections were done. But if you have the inspections with enough precision to tell you what's probably going to need to be done in 5 years or whatever, that helps you, because it's part of a larger asset management strategy. And that will help us, when you do those, that will help us define these future years much more precisely than we're able to do it today. The next one, and again, I think I heard you say this, but you didn't use these words. Right now, it appears that we fix things when they break, as we have to. But a much more cost-effective asset management strategy is, again, I'm sure all of you do it in your personal properties and your business holdings, is you do a preventative maintenance program so you try and keep it from ever breaking, because breakage means service interruption. So long-term, generally speaking, an aggressive asset management program that looks at preventative maintenance in the long run is going to be cheaper than breakdown maintenance in cost to actually do it, but most importantly, from your perspective, cheaper in terms of inconvenience to your public. Because, an example, right after I got here, we sat down with Sunset Center to talk about their capital improvement needs. During the discussion, we were talking about what do they need next year, and the manager there was explaining, well, just before Christmas, we lost the controller for our HVAC system. Well, you can't operate that facility without the heating ventilating systems working. They were able to save the day and save the show, so to speak, because their repairman happened to have a circuit board in his toolbox that would work to fix it. So basically, we're hanging on by a thread right there. So I said, well, That's not something that we need to plan for next year. Let us take what we planned for this year, move that to next year, and get that done right now. And the purchase order has been signed to buy that piece of equipment that not only will give you a secure operating facility at Sunset, but it will also integrate the controls of some of your other recent improvements at Sunset that also, in a couple of cases, resulted from breakdown maintenance strategy rather than preventative maintenance. So that's how it kind of all ties together in terms of where we're trying to move the city. Then the last one is particularly important as well. Part of building your capacity to do things that maximize the value of the money you have and the staff you have is having appropriate plans. For instance, Councilmember Barron and Councilmember Tice, we're just going over the climate action plan. Well, in the climate action, there's a number of projects that talk about resilience. And resilience in today's environment is critically important. So having those plans, you can start thinking about, okay, if I'm doing the police station, I ought to be thinking about resilience there. So what do we need at the police station to make sure that irrespective of what Mother Nature plans for us, we'll continue to be able to operate? Or if we should have a cyber attack, we can continue to operate. So how do we make that resilience? That impacts the cost. So what do you have to do to make it resilient? So that's the type of thinking that we've tried to capture from what we heard you say and what we heard your public say as we were trying to start building these projects. We're at the front end of this, not at the end of it. So I give you one example in terms of the HVAC controller, where that was a right now. That's a decision we need to make right now. We don't need to wait till next year to put that into the capital program. Do it now because it's an emergency, and let's do it before it breaks. So any questions on these strategies? Because is there anything that I've missed that you think we should be thinking about when we go back into these projects and say, how do we prioritize them? How do we think about them? Have I captured the things that you're most interested in?
Very good. Karen?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, first thing that comes to mind is we have to deal with health and safety.
Yes, ma'am.
So any projects that are pending, that have not happened, that could impact health and safety and liability, I think are very important. Do you see that in this strategy?
Yes, ma'am. And it really goes back to making sure that it can do what it's supposed to do. That first one, where the facilities are failing, are the sidewalks failing, are the streets failing, is the storm drain system failing? Those all have an impact on public safety. To be truthful, if I look at I'll call it the bowels of the public works area in there, that's really a public safety building. It's public works, but what they do is all about public safety. So looking at the electrical system, looking at the fact that we've had to, I'll call it jerry-rig some solutions because of leaks in the building, to how do we deal with that in the meantime. So yes, public safety is really the top touchstone, but it is kind of buried in there. You'll see it actually called out as a specific item a little later on in the slides. Any other comments
Any
or
other
questions on
comments?
strategy?
So Fred, I'd
Yes, sir.
suggest that maybe it's important as we go to do these projects, we make sure that we're doing it 100%. Brought to my attention today that as they're going ahead and replacing the decking at the Forest Theater, some of the joists are rotted, but they're decking over them anyway. That's the kind of thing I wouldn't want to see going on as we talk about city strategies on repairs. We got to go back and build it back 100% correctly.
Yes,
So
sir.
I'm going to share that's in here. I've got some illustrations here that I'll share with you later, but it's kind
Okay.
of concerning to me.
Okay, next slide. As Chip mentioned earlier, 17 projects have been completed. 12 projects that were approved and funded for this year are recommended for carryover. At least for now, they're recommended. We'll need to look at them in more detail. But we didn't see any that said, well, that'd really be stupid to do this. They need to be done. The real question is, how do you prioritize it within the resources available? We also identified 18 projects that would be desirable in this first year of 22-23, but we just may not have the ability to do them. And you would think that since they're not in this year's fund for carryover, they're of a lower priority, but once we get into it, we may actually find, like the HVAC at Sunset, we find, oh no, one for next year is more important than this year. But that still is to be determined as we dive much more deeper and rapidly, much more deeply into the costing and better definition of the projects. This will be kind of an initial review. Please don't get caught up on numbers right now, either on the revenue numbers or the expenditure numbers. Really think about what are the projects that are important, then we figure out how we push them into the funds available. And then, of course, at the end, we'll be looking for any initial direction, not final direction, but initial direction. Then we will go back, do that next iteration to come back for the next council meeting. And then we should be able to go to the Planning Commission, because they have to make a consistency determination that the CIP program is consistent with the general plan before you actually adopt it. Next slide. Carryover. These are ones that we put up there. We don't want to lose somebody else's money if we've got it, whether it be a grant or whether it be level of effort that we have to maintain. Some people call that maintenance of effort. But these are some of the projects that we're thinking, well, we need to make sure we get moving on these. Next slide. Please stop me if there's any questions, and Bob will answer them, just to make sure he's
Any
still awake.
questions? I don't see any.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Karen?
We talked about the undergrounding fund that will go away if we
Good,
don't.
good question. That's a very good question. Why is that not on the list? And that's because we don't lose the funding next year. It's a year after that. We have talked, Bob and I have talked about how do we handle that. His initial discussions with PG&E and showing them the park, Mission Trails Park, said, yeah, that's a pretty good project. That's a pretty good project for PG&E to fund and not use 20A money. Except the question is, when will PG&E fund it? So then you have to make a decision, which way do you want to go? So it's not on the list, it's about to lose because we're not losing it that quickly, but we do have it in the back of our mind. The police station remodel, an important carryover, and I'll probably go into more detail on this than I will on any other project, only because we started immediately in terms of reworking the project as a result of the council's direction and interest and the public feedback you got on this project. So the architect, Mr. Casaban, is already working on it. We're trying to better define a wide range of things. One will be, okay, what is the actual cost from an architectural point of view of updating the project portion that we had planned to do to the new codes? Because, as the mayor said, that will probably be slightly different than what the cost would be to design a whole new system. At the same time, we also added the other half of the building so that when you're done, you're going to be pretty much a whole building. Well, pretty much a whole building needs to be fire sprinklered, and it's not. So that's a cost we hadn't even thought about when we were talking a week ago, but that's an example of the type of detail that starts coming out when you have a project manager working with the architect to start really defining both the user needs as well as the code needs, as well as the, I'll call it the money reality in terms of how much you do. Similarly, as we got into the EOC, obviously an emergency operations center needs to be resilient. Well, what does that mean? And what does that mean, and how does it impact another part of the building? Because as part of the climate change, we're talking about EV chargers, we're talking about electric vehicles. We can get grants for electric vehicles to help fund that increment of cost. So that means, well, we better rethink the electrical service to that building, that if we didn't have a climate action plan, we wouldn't even be thinking about it probably, other than to bring it up to code. So that's the kind of detailed planning and analysis that needs to be done to bring back a more rational, completed price, both for the cost of the design as well as the cost of the construction. At the same time, we're doing what we do at the government pace of doing things. We're trying to accelerate that pace by adding human capacity to the city, and I'll talk about that in a second with regards to this project. We also have the supply chain issues that we're all hearing about and the labor issues. I talked to one consultant about, okay, if I were to say, I need a project manager right now, the answer would be, well, I'm not sure we can get one. We don't have any available ourselves, and they're paying a heck of a lot more than you are. So the first step, of course, is we were able to find someone that Chip and Bob thought would be great for the organization. An offer has been made, and hopefully he will be a city employee soon. But that would not be enough capacity. So as Chip said, we're finalizing a small contract to bring on a firm who's probably watching this right now to help us better define some of these projects over the next couple of weeks, to make sure we've got numbers for you that you can trust a little better than the numbers we have today, to build that human capacity. While we're doing that, we'll put another contract out on the street for a much larger project management support capability that is reflective of the direction I heard from you that said, we don't want any more excuses that we're waiting for a project management. Go buy project management. So that's where we're going on that. And that's kind of how that all ties together with that one project. And it can go from simple, like, well, in the old plan, there was a need to remove some asbestos floor tile. Doesn't seem to be there anymore, so we can check that off. We don't have to do that because it's now carpeted. So it's the detail that really gets into the numbers, and we'll ultimately have to do that with every single project. The police department just happens to be at the top of the list right now, and that's where we're putting our capacity. Fire and risk management assessment. I mean, I look at your trees, you look at your trees. I heard what your constituent said. I know you have a coastal climate, but you still have the potential of fire, as we saw in Pebble Beach and we saw at Fort Ord a number of years ago. We don't want to replicate that. So we need to be thinking about how we do that, how we assess it. But on the operational side, as I remember I said they all go together, we need to be thinking about how we train and exercise and practice doing some of this stuff. Like, when was the last time we really talked in depth about actually executing an evacuation plan, as one example? So CIP and operational go together. Ambulance and the AED, that again, an important carryover. You were blessed with a grant that will make that one a little bit easier, because the cost of these things are getting terribly expensive. A fire engine that used to cost $500,000 is now $750,000 to $800,000. I've not talked to Mr. Jednick about the ambulance in terms, are we using state pricing or what, but the number we have is the number that we had with the $50,000 to help us get what we think we need, but we'll see where that goes. For the 22-23, that gets us into the other piece of what you said about the police department. You wanted an EOC. You wanted an EOC that could also be a facility for other activities, whether it be your CERT program or whether it be a community program or so on. So knowing those functional uses, that will assist the architect in figuring out how do we get ingress and egress out of it in such a way that the public doesn't have to go through the bowels of the police department, but at the same time, all of the very expensive hardware you're going to have in this EOC are safeguarded. So that would be part of the design, and that's really additional scope. We hadn't given much thought of that. There had been a previous thought of an EOC in the couple, 3 years ago in one of your options, but it wasn't really detailed design. So this will get into the detailed design. So,
Let me add, because I will advocate for the EOC development, this community room, and I can again wax poetic or answer questions, council. But this, one of you recently said, is it better to complete a project or kind of spread our money a little bit more broadly? For one of our 2 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365-day-a-year facilities, I think the police department is the preeminent project for us. And this community room, this EOC, CERT room, what have you, will hopefully get us another 50 years out of this building. It's a 50, I'll be 56 soon, but it'll be a 56-year-old building here. And another 50 years will really get us to where, rather than having a building that's 75 or 80% complete, and we'll have to come back and compete for funding again in the future. So I can wax poetic, but that is a project that I would strongly encourage you to include as part of the existing scope and budget that we've appropriated for the PD remodel at this point in time. Thank you, Mr. Muir.
That is so important. I mean, when I first saw that, as I said at the other meeting, I was kind of taken aback by the condition, as you guys were as well. But I kind of thought about that headline that's going to be there if you spend $2 million and you've only done a third of what the project is. That's not a headline you want to read. You want a complete and totally functioning public safety building that provides other amenities for the community. So just to compliment what the city manager said. The other, I won't go into any details. I just want to give you a sense of how we are thinking about it, trying to make sure we're thinking the same way you're thinking about these various projects. And that's why you're seeing public safety first, in terms of this is where we'll put a lot of emphasis. Some of it is public safety, some of it is resilience, some of it is climate action plan. So it all ties together to start implementing where we think you want to go. Next slide, please. Again, these are, I'll call it representative of a couple of things. One, the carryover, we've got to get after the stuff that is broken because it impacts every time you have a heavy rain. So let's get after that storm drain system. You got to have a master plan. If we're going to know what we really want in the future for the library, we really do need a master plan so you can decide how you're going to phase it, if you're going to phase it. But without a master plan, it's also very, very difficult to attract somebody else's money to help pay for what needs to be paid for. On the other side, the facilities component inspection I've already talked about. The resilience planning. I don't know how many people have been following what's going on in Ukraine right now. We here at the city, you know, our IT folks, they got a little warning from CISA, the Homeland Security, a few days ago, you know, be particularly watchful of cyber attacks. They always are, and they continually repeating, you know, okay, hey guys, make sure you do what you're supposed to do when you turn your computers off and all of that stuff. But the fact is, we have more and more exposure to the potential threats from others, whether it be cyber criminals or an actual adversary. We need to be thinking about the resilience beyond just climate resilience. Luckily, climate resilience and the resilience to be able to withstand other types of attacks are very, very complementary. The final thing I'll mention on this slide is the contract project management support. As I said, one person we hope is on board. Bob will be back at 100%. We will have a short-term project management contract for traffic engineering and project management, and then hopefully we'll have one or two open-ended contracts for project management for this bow wave. Given what Mr. Rarick said earlier about, you know, you don't know what's going to happen in the future, so let's not invest in a lot of people on the city staff and all of the burden that that carries with it. Let's keep that core that can execute your, I'll call it your normal steady state, and then hire outside, a little more expensive per hour, quite a bit more expensive per hour, but hire that outside for those peak loadings that you need. Next slide.
I have a
Yes,
question.
sir.
Yeah, I'm a little bit, frustrated isn't the right word, but the 6th Avenue Plaza concept development just keeps coming up. Like, you know, ever since I've been on the council, it comes up every year, and I don't see right now the support on the council for it at all. Karen, you know, Councilmember Filito has talked a lot about a downtown master plan, which I generally support, and I've said so before. And to me, that sort of design, which encompasses all of downtown and would include the area in front of the library, is way more important and more general and precludes doing the 6th Avenue stuff. So I don't know.
There's a question.
Pardon me, I'm a little like, why do we have this on here and not the downtown master plan?
Because we haven't received the council guidance yet. When we
Exactly.
receive
Well,
the
I don't-
council guidance, it couldn't be whatever, I mean, when we actually get to, at the end of this, you might well say, as a council, our initial
Exactly.
guidance is, let's do a more broadly scoped master plan for the downtown. That could be the council guidance. The council guidance could be, say, stay focused on this little piece of the downtown. But then it's really to throw it up so you can provide us that guidance initial. You may say, we want to think about this some more and bring back this or that to us for the next time. But it's there, to be truthful, sir, because it was on the project list from the year before. It had been discussed, and I personally didn't know enough about it to say, this doesn't work. I just know how important the libraries are to the people of Carmel. And that was kind of an interesting idea of having that plaza. So I was kind of intrigued by it, but I certainly understand it could be part of a larger, but that really is the guidance that we
Exactly.
really hope to receive as a part of these meeting processes.
That noted, are there any other questions? Okay, I don't see any.
I'd like to
Karen, I'm sorry.
ask a question. One thing that is important to me that we've talked about over years, even before I was on council, is that just because the beach, the parks and so on don't have roofs that leak and pipes that break and basements that flood, they need to be part of the facilities inspection as well. Are you
Totally agree.
anticipating that
Oh,
those physical
any-
things that we have are part of this as well?
Absolutely. I mean, you have some really high-use facilities down on the beach, as an example, and just really high use. I mean, I don't know what you're going to do with the mansion there on the hillside, but when I went through that, I said, oh my gosh, how many dollars are you going to spend to stabilize this to sit empty? So those are the questions that I was kind of struggling with as I went through. But to answer your question, yes, ma'am. What we would do is we would develop the list of facilities that we actually want facility component inspections, and we would start with the higher use facilities first, higher visibility stuff. But ultimately, in your asset management plan, you're going to have every component of every building in an asset management software. So you know, when is it due for the fan blower to be lubricated on such and such an air handling unit at Sunset Center? They may have that at Sunset Center now. I don't know how detailed, but I know in most of the buildings that isn't the case. That isn't the case at all. So did that answer your question, ma'am?
It would
Yeah,
include-
partially.
It would
I-
include the natural areas, ma'am, as well, so.
Yes, I
Yeah,
want
so
the natural
North
areas.
Dunes and the natural areas, Mr. Muir. And Anya, I mean, we would include those as well. For example, I think what we're looking for is an annual funding stream for maintenance in the Mission Trail Nature Preserve and the North Dunes and the urbanized forest. And so to answer your question, they're not capital projects. That's usually embedded in the maintenance section of our operating budget. If I didn't thank Agnes, that was my oversight. Agnes is the one who put both the table together and the report. So I apologize. But yes, ma'am, those would be covered assets.
Yeah.
Okay,
and
I
when-
understand that would be covered under the maintenance things, but as far as having inspections of all of our assets, be it a building or a forest or a beach or a park, it's all valuable. It all needs to be inspected. It all needs to be considered as what we can do to maintain it at its best level, and also for it to be resilient in case of damages in the future.
Yes, ma'am. I think you probably are frustrated in part because to deal with your realities, your physical realities of the last few years, you had to really deal with lowering your people costs, and a lot of assets that could be focused in forestry you lost. So you're now at a time you're going to have to make some tough choices in terms of how you're going to do that. But to answer your question, I probably would have not thought of it the way you said it until you said it, in terms of, as we're looking at the facilities component, we really do need to think about the greenways and the other parks, as well as the actual facilities in the parks. Okay?
Thank you.
All set.
Got it. Well, that carryover is to get rid of some of the eyesores in the park that we went and looked at, and I saw. The others, they're kind of long-standing things. I mean, the beach sand and retaining walls, we got to do something there. And so that's why we said, carry this thing over. There's none of those that should be dropped from the list. And luckily, you have a group of volunteers that are, I'm amazed at what you have in Carmel Cares in terms of the effort that they're putting into that. Which actually kind of takes me to the last part of the second column. Those are all projects that are deferred maintenance, but much of what Carmel Cares and your other volunteer efforts are doing are really addressing deferred maintenance. They're taking on things that they say, this is so important in terms of the appearance of our community. We want to help, and we want to help now. As I mentioned at your last meeting on priorities, I think you need to think about how do you facilitate those volunteer efforts? How do you make that kind of seamless? Now, you know, and I'm sure your attorney has told you, you have some boundaries you have to worry about in terms of, how you bid things, and we're looking at more depth in that. There's a number of things you need to think about, but that ought to be as easy as possible for both the volunteers and for the city staff. I wish I could say I have a perfect solution, but it's something Chip and I have been talking about, and we'll bring Bob into the discussion. How do we do that? Because it needs to be facilitated to make it easier for all. Next slide. Oh, before we leave this slide, street sweeper. As you'll see in the chart in there, as I recall, we have a cost in there for the street sweeper, but again, in this quest for resilience and greenness and electrification, what are they called? The community power, Central Coast Power. They're offering grants to cover the costs between a gas engine and an electric. That's pretty phenomenal. But again, if you're going to have the gas one, you got to be able to charge it, and that goes back to the police station and the power upgrade for the police station and what that does to the Public Works building, because it's really going to be in the Public Works building rather than the police station. So, next slide now. Again, these are the projects funded by others that we think they're going to be funded by others. Bob has been really focused at home. He's back half-time, as you know, and he's really been focused on getting that lease prepared, because you have some eager people and we don't want to keep them waiting. Let's find out what the rules are and get it going so we can get that done. The other projects are in the CIP or listed under Carmel Cares projects that should naturally go forward. This is a summary chart. Again, I wouldn't get caught up on the city funds number yet. Those are really rough estimates. We know, for instance, if you appropriated $2 million for the PD renovation, but that was just for the first third of it. We really haven't gotten to, okay, what about the EOC and what about the locker rooms and so on. So they're interesting numbers, they're order of magnitude numbers, but they're best for looking at scale and, okay, how does this fit together and relative value to relative cost. But that is the listing of the carryover projects as we have them now. Is there anything up there that does not make sense to you, or that you say, well, yeah, I'm not sure that we really do need to do that anymore? I didn't see any as Agnes and Bob and I were going over, but you see the city in a totally different way than I do. Okay.
Any questions of Fred on this?
Okay, next. This is the first year of the 5-year plan. In other words, next year, which starts the 1st of July. Again, as you start looking at it, you see the EOC PD renovation additional scope, and 1.3. I know where that number came from. It was a basic square foot number that I put together. I've got the architects looking and saying, okay, how close was I? And what did I not miss? Because I was taking rough numbers as opposed to, okay, if you really have to do this to meet code and get a building permit just like everybody else does, what's it going to cost in today's marketplace? And I haven't been in today's marketplace in quite some time. So this is the listing of projects, and I think this is where you probably have the highest probability of wanting to say, is this really important or not important from a big picture point of view as we get towards the end of the briefing. But that's what's on the list now for the first year of the 5-year plan. There are more projects than money. So what we have to do is we need to come back, if you essentially bless some of these other assumptions, we need to bring back a recommended list that tries to capture the essence of what we've heard is okay this evening.
The one item, if I may, thank you, that you won't see on here, and Chief Euler, again, there's such a benefit to a fresh set of eyes, like we see on the PD from Chief Euler and Mr. Muir. Unfortunately, Chief Euler's mother-in-law died on Saturday, so he's not here. Maybe we could adjourn. I don't know her name, Mr. Mayor, I apologize, but we could adjourn the meeting today in her honor, or maybe the April meeting. But the one item is additional safety cameras in the downtown. And Chief Euler and I spoke about that, and Commander Watkins, and we think it would be, if we when we get a new police chief, having him or her have their fingerprints on that kind of a project. So again, and it's an expensive project, but it's not astronomically expensive, so you'd see it perhaps next year added in as we go through the process. But it's a robust list here, and obviously we don't have all the money to cover it. If you told us that we should fund all of these projects, again, as Mr. Mayor just said, we would come back with a funding plan at a future council meeting. And again, if part of that resulted in a reduction in fund balance, we would tell you where it would come from and what you'd end up with after you would use some of fund balance. Thank you.
Carrie.
Thank you. So we had 17 projects that we're carrying over from this year, and you're suggesting adding 18.
We're carrying over 12, we're adding 18 for a total of 30.
12.
Yeah,
Okay.
12, 18, 30, right? Right.
So
We finished 17 this year so far.
12 carryover projects.
Yes, ma'am.
And we're suggesting 18. Okay, Fred. What's the capacity of our city to have a total of 30 projects grinding out in the next fiscal year?
That's a good question. Yeah, Fred, I was going to ask the same question.
I taught you well, Chip. You don't have the capacity.
What?
You do not have the capacity to do that right now.
Right.
But depending on what you tell Chip and the team, you're going to spend a good portion of the rest of this year building that capacity. My initial thoughts would be, and private sector does this all the time, a lot of public sector folks get queasy about the idea of having an architect that designs a building be the project manager for the construction. That's not unusual at all. You do it in the private sector all the time. I have asked the architect to give us a proposal for doing the project management on the police department, so it's totally seamless. So that, because that's going to be a full-time job. I mean, that's going to be a big job that's going to take a year or so. So that's how I add capacity, and that's an easy add, except for writing the check to pay for it. The other capacity was drafting a scope of work for a project management consultant, again, falling back on what you said at the last council. And there's 2 firms that I am aware of in the area. I am guessing there are more, and I am guessing there are also some small independent firms that would propose. And then Chip and Bob would have the opportunity to build temporary capacity focused on these projects, and basically you put them into packages, and you go to work and you design it. Now it's going to take a lot of staff time, Because somebody has to tell the architect, the designer, okay, what exactly is that two-line sentence in the CIP? Who are the stakeholders? What do you need to think about in the special provisions? How is it going to be maintained? Because one piece that I don't see in your budget documents, but maybe there and I don't see it, that I'm used to is when you start adding capital to the inventory, you better add money to your operating budget because you got to operate and maintain that stuff. And you need to think about that because it isn't free. But you're going to have to build the capacity. You do not have the capacity right now. I doubt seriously when we get through with all of this, you're going to have that many projects because I doubt that you're going to have the money to do all of those projects when we start getting more accurate numbers. Because some of these numbers are 9 months old. So they haven't been adjusted in any way. So, but it's a start point. And as Councilmember Barron, I think, said, there are things that are not there. There's not a downtown master plan on that list. Should there be? It's a different skill set than a construction project, but it still costs money and it takes staff involved. It probably takes even more staff involvement to really get the input from the people as opposed to, survey monkey stuff. So you could add stuff and that's going to have to knock something off. So you don't have the capacity, you can build the capacity, and we're starting to work on that right now per the guidance from the council and Chip.
So, Bobby, just
Well, one of my, I appreciate what Councilperson Tice said, but one of my questions would be like the radio lease. Is that a big project?
No.
So
No,
like some of these projects are pretty.
Some of them, they're CIP because of your definition of CIP. That is actually, as I recall, it's a lease through the county, I think. The county did the buy, and you're just leasing it. So that one's pretty easy.
Yeah, some of these
getting
projects
them, testing them, and all that. Yeah,
are pretty quick.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
so if I might just, Bobby, can I just build on that for a minute? So under projects completed in fiscal years 2021 and through 22, it does say police radios, 22 new police radios were leased or to replace the existing ones. The lease purchase was for $30,000 per year for a total of 6 years. So what is that why don't we just fund it for its entire 6 years? I mean, it seems to me that's listed as a completed project, yet we're coming back to fund it again. So we'd have to do that every 2 years?
Well, you've got, and again, I've not read your lease. I'm guessing, is Jeff behind me by any chance? Because he's probably familiar with it. I don't know the terms and conditions of your lease from the county. You probably spread the cost over a period of years. I don't know whether it is a lease purchase agreement. It may well be lease purchase.
It says lease/purchase for $30,000 per year for a total of 6 years as completed projects for 2021-2022.
Yeah. Hey, Bob? Okay. Could you answer that question for the Mayor,
It's a
Bob?
natural question for the chief or the commissioner, and so.
We can just flag it and answer it
Yes,
later. but
yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
It's
Well, that's
either
what we'll do.
delusional or inaccurate or I misprinted.
We'll get you an answer
That'd be great, thank you.
at a future meeting.
Okay, moving on.
Okay. Shall we go to the next one? You actually, if anybody can read that, you have a hard copy, or you should have a hard copy before you, and there are hard copies right here.
For the public's purposes, it's kind of
It's a little bit easier to see at home, I hope. But basically, to be truthful, the first column and the second column are the only ones that are really kind of important. Unless you look at the last 3 columns and you see something, whoa, that is really important to me, it's really important to my constituents, and we really want to drag that forward. But of course, dragging something forward means you probably have to drag something out of the current funded. But it just gives you a sense of the flow. This chart, if you do facility component inspections, and then you start using those inspections to help drive a more aggressive maintenance program, you'll change this chart quite a bit actually over time. Because an awful lot of what we see in here are truly maintenance and repair stuff as opposed to new facilities and new programs. So I would not spend a lot of time in the out years unless you see a title or something that you think is really important and we need to drag it over and look at it in more depth for the next council meeting.
All right, thoughts, council members, questions? I'm going to open it to the public at some point, so
Yeah.
before we go to direction, I'll be going to the public for their interest.
Okay.
No,
You don't
absolutely.
have to decide tonight, council. Again, it's something you
Yeah.
can think about and email, or when our individual updates, we can talk about them as well.
This is an effort to somewhat clumsily summarize the five-year forecast. I mean, it says what we've already been saying, you got more wants than you have money. So we'll have to figure out how we balance those. Next slide. Here's the guidance that we need from you. It goes back to what I've said all through this position. If you see something that's making you uncomfortable, or that you're not seeing something, that's probably the most important. If there's something we really have missed in this, please let us know.
So Fred, if I might on that one, then that would be an opportunity for Councilman Barron to say, I really don't like that park concept on, over by Devendorf. That'd be a good time to
Yes, sir.
blow it up.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Again, confirm that you didn't see anything that we're carrying over that ought to be ripped out. And then if you want to say, give us more information on all of those things that we're going to look at in 22, 23. And then any other adjustments in the long-term five-year plan. So, but really stay focused on what is it we want to do during the next year to 2 years. Because what you decide tonight might be occupied 2 years from now. So think of it in those terms. What does this community need in 2 years or 3 years? Of course, you'll open it to public comment and see what the public has to say, and then any guidance you give us, we will take back, continue to refine the list, better refine the dollars, stay focused on what we think we can get done, build your capacity to do it, and hopefully execute a program that I can come back as a tourist in a couple of years and say, we thought of that when I was there for a couple of weeks. Any questions?
Any questions of council members? Not seeing anything, Fred? Excellent. All right, is there anything else, Chip, anything else in summation on this presentation?
No, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, I'm going to open it up for public comments. It's an opportunity for members of the public to comment on these items. It's kind of a long list of projects, but if you have something that you'd like to highlight now, I'd suggest it would be a good time to come forward. Start with those present in the room. Is there anybody in the room that wants to speak tonight? Don't be shy.
Good afternoon, Council. Thanks for holding this hearing. I have two just data points. Actually, I'll make it 4. Thanks, Jeff, for tagging the Library Plaza tied to the downtown master plan. That's a good connection. Would like to see that happen. Also on the CIP, Karen, your call out to make sure we're including the natural resources was also really critical. On that front, I would like to see the Mission Trail, start over on that one. The Forest Hill Park get a little bit more attention. It's been neglected for a very long time. In my opinion, it needs a lot of work. And then also with the CIP investments, as we look long-term, as we work to address all of the incremental housing challenges that we've got, I don't know how all of that will come together and how that will affect your short-term decisions, because we've clearly got a lot of housing challenges here in town, whether it's the addition of a whole lot more ADUs that are coming on us and the infrastructure that's needed to support those, et cetera. So would like to see that be considered as you're continuing to evaluate this spending.
Despite the fact she's wearing a mask, I do believe this is Nancy Toomey.
Yes.
And are you speaking for yourself, or this is representing the CRA?
No, this is myself.
Okay, great, thank
Thank
you.
you.
Just like to get that clarification. Is there anybody else present tonight that would like to speak in the room? All right, seeing no one, I'll go out to the Zoom world. Is there anybody Zooming that would like to speak tonight on this project, these projects?
This is Tara Toomey.
Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having this meeting. I am here as trustee for the Harrison Memorial Library Board, and I know we sent a memorandum to the council with respect to the CIP projects. I would just say that We, of course, think the library is one of the greatest jewels here in Carmel. We specifically had asked that the council accept the staff's recommendation to carry over our master library plan funding to next year for many of the reasons that have already been discussed. While because of capacity issues, that hasn't been fully implemented this year, we do think it is a critical step in kind of figuring out where we need to go for the future. So I'm just here to say that we strongly recommend that project get carried over. And then secondly, of course, to the extent that we continue to maintain the facilities at the library, that's obviously an important step. We have a lot of, and hopefully we'll be able to open our doors even more soon as our capacity increases. And so continuing facility maintenance there, as has been discussed, is also an important aspect of the CIP. So with that, I will turn it over to whomever's next, but appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Tara, thank you. Dale Byrne, I think, is next.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Potter. We at Carmel Cares are still new to this budgeting process, but we're quick learners and now have a few data points to look at. During the pandemic, during our first year, our donors came through with about $80,000 in productivity asset donations to the city, and we donated over 3,000 hours of volunteer labor to maintain the city's public spaces around the city and run our nonprofit, which is 100% dedicated to Carmel-by-the-Sea activities. Last year, we donated over $60,000 in assets and services and over 5,000 hours of volunteer labor. Those will need to be accepted in the consent calendar item once we write it up with Bob when he comes back. Last year, we lobbied for $100,000 for Scenic Pathway, and the council allocated $50,000, and we appreciated that. As I said last week, and this report shows, this has yet to be spent due to a lack of a city project manager, and we're happy that this issue is being resolved. It appears that this year, the city is going to pull the $50,000 that wasn't spent last year into this year and allocate $25,000 to be split between Carmel Cares and Mission Trail Nature Preserve. We're not sure what this is actually for, since we weren't involved in coming up with this number, but we do appreciate that it was there. This year, Carmel Cares will probably donate over $100,000 in services and assets and over 7,000 hours of volunteer labor. In addition, it was interesting that last year the city allocated specific line items in the CIP for Carmel Cares, for which Carmel Cares would raise funds and manage execution with oversight from Public Works and planning where required. It appears the same is being done this year. This is a compliment, but plays into what I'll say in a minute, if I don't run out of time. Chip brought up the issue of some maintenance items being covered in the operating budget. One easy way to enhance Carmel Cares efforts would be to authorize several landscaping companies that would be paid by the city and work hand in hand with our project managers. This would help address some of the issues related to the skin of the game. I'm just going to jump down to my final comments here. We thank the city for our partnership, and we enjoy our positive relationship with the city leadership and the Public Works team. And in addition, our volunteers enjoy being a key part of keeping Carmel beautiful, safe, and inviting. However, the biggest comment we get from our constituents, and we get it often, is, why are you having to do what you do? I pay my taxes and expect the city government to provide the services and pay for their fair share of expenses related to what we're doing. And to some extent, that's true. In a public-private partnership, both parties should have skin in the game, and there is an intersection point that requires negotiations to develop a good balance. In summary, since we're treating our public spaces like we're treating our buildings and we're fixing it when things break, why don't we just admit it at some point and come up with the proper relationship where Carmel Cares and other city support groups take this into account? A separate foundation or something like Hillsborough has done. It seems that this is starting to happen organically with us, but with the public questioning the city's commitment because there's no defined responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Thank you for your efforts. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight? Anybody else in the Zoom world wishing to speak? Shirley, you have your hand up, I think. Shirley Moon? Shirley, the floor is yours. There she is.
Hi, it's Shirley Moon. I'm with Carmel Cares, and I wanted to thank Karen for bringing up the idea of the infrastructure that needs attention and should be part of the maintenance in the parks and the pathways. We've got irrigation systems, DG repairs, guardrails, and borders along the pathway that are in terrible shape in some places. And I would love for us to have that as just an ongoing issue that needs attention. And I would like to thank Fred for bringing up finally the idea that ongoing maintenance is critical. And it's always very attractive to build something brand new, and the shiny new object gets a lot of attention. But the maintenance is the key to keeping our community pristine, and as Fred said, keeping it first class, which is what we all expect and what our visitors expect. And it all interfaces in the revenue that can be pulled into the city. The more pristine it is, the more the public appreciates it, and word of mouth is worth everything. So I would also tie in with, in the planning, it seems like we need to coordinate our efforts better. A perfect example is that the center medians down Ocean Avenue are now being restored. We're weeding them, replanting, irrigation, and all of that. And yet there's some kind of a split rail fence being proposed to go down the center. That makes no sense. We're out of order. And if the split rail fence is that critical, and all of the city council and planning thinks it is, that should be done now, before we place the boulders and the plants and the irrigation and the lighting, which is already in. It's the same attitude that I am amazed that we're trying to stick benches in the middle of flower beds down on Scenic. We need to coordinate our efforts, and we can do this. It's, as Fred said, we need to plan and make sure that our maintenance is at the top of our list. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Shirley, and thank you for your efforts. Is there anybody else wishing to speak tonight? Don't be shy. Last chance. All right, I'll close the public comment period in both the Zoom and the real world here. Bring it back to council for direction. Council members, why don't we take a second here and just kind of look at where we are. What is our level of comfort with the capital projects that are presented before us, both those that are recommended for completion or carryovers, and those that are recommended for fiscal years, for the add-ons for the fiscal years 2022 and 23. Is there any concerns or discussions on those items?
Could you put those slides back up?
Sure. Remember, this is preliminary only.
Yeah.
We're not going to make any definitive decisions. I think we could say we have a comfort level with this, and then we could talk about possible funding, just to give kind of staff a heads up on whether we want to use some of the fund balances and where we want to go with our contingency, strategic reserve dollars. So one of the questions I'd ask is, under the radios, which are listed as a capital improvement project, but actually when it gives us a definition of what is a capital improvement project, it's an asset with single piece, when any single component or piece of equipment that costs more than $10,000 expect to have a useful life exceeding 10 years. Then I went on to the fact that these are basically on a lease for 6 years with $30,000. I'm wondering, does this really fall under the definition of a capital project? Because each radio, each single piece can't be $30,000.
No, sir. It's a.
I don't know where to bury it, but we could take it off the list.
We've been debating this, and I'm sure Fred's been debating the definition of a capital project for his career. We've been debating it. I've been doing it for over 25 years. So, some of these are items that we want to highlight out of necessity, and to share with the public as well. Sometimes when they get rolled up in the operating budget, it's not an opportunity to to
Perhaps
communicate.
it would fall
with the
better
public.
than under the public safety component.
Yes, sir.
I'm just saying that from a hardcore definition of what a capital improvement project is, it doesn't really make the fitting.
Yeah, I hear you, sir. We'll scrub it the list again.
All right. Any other questions or comments or direction on this?
I have a question.
Jeff, and then Bobby.
Thank you. To Shirley's point before, over the course of the past few years, the the scenic pathway project has sort of come and gone and come and gone, and at some point it's been $500,000 and now it's $50,000. And I'm not sure what $50,000 is and whether that's really the right project for the scenic pathway. I mean, it seems like when I was first elected 3 years ago, it was literally a $500,000 project, and there was $250,000 in years like 2 and 3, which would now be years 0 and 1, or -1 and 0, or whatever. So could you sort of comment on that? Like what's the current plan for the pathway, and like, is the irrigation system going to get fixed? Is the
Yeah, so the irrigation system is currently being worked on by Ms. Davis and Mr. Muir and Anyos and everyone. So we can do this one of two ways. I can try to answer, and we can have Bob and the team answer, or we can come back at the next meeting and give you a more thorough explanation after we talk among ourselves, Mr. Barron.
I'd look to the rest of the council, whatever preference on that. I think that'd probably be a better use of our time to give you some concerns and highlight those, and then have you come back with a more full report. But I'm only one of 5, so what's north, south, east, west on the heads? Jeff, what do you like?
I don't want to take up too much time tonight, but if there's a 30-second answer, it sounds like there isn't a 30-second
No,
answer.
sir. No, there's not. Not on that one.
So my second project then obviously is the 6th Avenue Plaza.
Yeah.
Which I just haven't ever seen support on the council for it, and it strikes me as being a little more of a strategic priority than just a plain old capital improvement project budget. And my concern with this project, even though I see that you have $0 allocated to it, is that it's still going to take up staff time. And I think that the project that Karen has talked about sort of over and over again is more important than that, has a bigger scope than that. And most importantly, it's easy to see that we could start using 6th Avenue as some sort of a car thoroughfare down to the beach if we slow things down on Ocean a little bit. And this project would completely destroy the opportunity to do that. So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't do that. But I think that the downtown project, the look at downtown and the traffic downtown and the parking downtown is more important than that. And then,
Somebody's consensus on that, I'd agree.
But I would say that there was support. I support the project, but I think that it's better to put it in the general plan than on its own. But I do support the idea.
Okay.
So.
Pending further review and input, yeah. Okay.
And then one thing was the Mission Trail Nature Preserve, the Loyola Footbridge construction. I think in the staff report we got, said that it was sort of all going to be funded by the Mission Trail Nature Preserve folks. Thank you, Mission Trail Nature Preserve folks. But it's listed as a $100,000 outlay in year 2. And so I'm kind of unsure about and I know you mentioned that some of the data in the chart is not really right.
Yeah, I think the verbiage in the agenda report talked about Carmel Cares. Ms. Martellette, should that have been green? Should it, the cost, should that have been highlighted green in the big sheet?
Yes, at this point it should be green. It's still really in the early stages of the project. And we're really looking at just designing and early stages of development. It's a priority for the Friends of Mission Trail Nature Preserve, and I think they've expressed interest in putting some funding towards it. And so as that project moves forward a little bit, this is still very early, sort of in the idea stage for that project. So as it moves forward a little bit further, we'll be able to refine that one.
Yeah, so we'll flesh it out. Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll flesh it out for you, and again, if we have more information when we come back next month or in May, whatever it is, we'll share that with you. Thank you, Anyos.
And then finally, the Harrison Memorial Library renovations. Thank you, Tara, for coming to speak to us about carrying that stuff over. The $300,000 that's listed in the staff report, is this exterior, interior, and carpet?
Yes, sir.
And then it may leverage up to $500,000 in private donations for something else? Like, I don't see that on here.
Yeah,
I don't understand the relationship between the quid pro quo there, if that's what it is, or.
Yeah, Mr. Harari, do you have a quick answer on that one, or should we bring that one back as well?
We could certainly bring that one back. This very project was discussed a year ago. And if Ashley is available, she could perhaps talk about the interest of the library patrons contributing a significant amount of money to make mostly interior upgrades. But I don't recall specific renovations.
Ms. Wright's not feeling well today, so we'll bring back an answer on that as well.
Okay. Jeff, anything else?
That's it, thank you.
Bobby? Nothing? Okay. Carrie and then Karen?
So I think what Jeff's getting at is that the 6th Avenue project, Plaza project, I think it needs to be looked at as a whole of the downtown. And I think that's what we're getting at. It's not that we don't like the project, but I think the whole of the downtown needs to be looked at, especially with paid parking being a part of what we're looking at as a city. So that I think if you, instead you said 6th Avenue Plaza, you would say downtown, what do you call it, Karen?
Master plan.
Downtown master plan. So I think that's what we're getting at there. I'm feeling comfortable with what the staff has put forward so far. I'm a little concerned about the funding for this. I think that I'm comfortable with the carryovers. So that's where I stand right now.
Good, thank you. Karen?
And, yes, I'd just like to say thank you to Councilman Barron for bringing this up, and to the rest of the council for looking at the project of downtown master plan as a whole, so that we don't do things piecemeal that then might hamstring future solutions. Many years ago, there was a post office plaza that a lot of time and energy from volunteers went into, and then it never happened. Now we all see that the post office has been greatly impacted during this recent construction project, and will be even more impacted in a future project. So there are many things in our downtown that, you know, a master plan could look at what's working, what's not working, how could we do something better, how could we direct those visitors that come to town in a better way, and include things like a post office plaza or a library plaza, depending on what traffic plans are made. So I think it's a good idea to have a broader look at the downtown rather than just that library plaza. I love the library plaza, but I don't want to champion something that might, you know, have a better solution.
Good. Karen?
I'd like the chief to come back and explain about the camera issue. You know, I hate to say it, but we are having some issues with public safety. And so what's the scope of what he thinks about that? So I would like that. And I would like him to discuss the idea of the EOC, of what he has in mind. Because there's been some talks about a mobile one, and having it in the community center. And when I talked to him about that, it made a lot of sense to me to have it in the community center, but I think we'd like to have more discussion about that.
Got it.
Good, good. Bobby?
Well, I don't think we were directed not to really discuss money too much tonight. Was that correct? Am I correct in that?
We can go ahead and give our direction of how we feel about using fund balance, for example, not get down to the specifics of the dollar amount today.
Tip your hand a little, yeah.
Well, I just would tip my hat is, you know, why I don't know the numbers on the right very well. Like, I don't know how much a street sweeper is and all of those things, but I would say that the EOC and the PD renovation is so sorrowfully, you know, so low. It seems like we should just kick that up automatically over 1.3 million.
Well, okay, well, with the direction to staff, we want to go ahead and get it done as affordably as possible while getting all the components in there that we want, but I think we'll give staff direction that that's a high priority.
Yeah,
excellent.
Definitely a high priority. It just seems like it's a very low amount, so.
And I'd just like to comment that I think it behooves us to actually look at already what this has sparked as far as ideas, and the fact that all of our public assets, be they buildings, be they parks, be they downtown, they all have value, and in order to maintain that value, it's very, very clear that we really need to step it up with our maintenance and some of these plans that will bring us into a much more responsible way of dealing with some of these things instead of the fix-it, break-it that we've been operating under. And, it may be time to play a little catch-up here, so that might affect how we go into the fund balance on a basis to identify those areas where we really are behind and get to them. So, thank you.
If I may, real quickly to that, I mean, I think you can delve into fund balance in a surgical way rather than using a bulldozer. So again, we'll come back so that we'll come back with some ideas on that. Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry, Mr. Barron.
No worries. So I'm sorry, Dave, I had a comment on my staff report and not on my chart. It was about the concrete road repairs between Monteverdi and San Antonio. And I think that road is a mess, and I do think it needs to be repaired. But I think there's opportunity there to improve safety for bikes and for pedestrians, especially pedestrians that cross ocean. So I had a personal experience a couple of weeks ago crossing Casanova, and I was getting literally run over by someone who was driving downhill and basically floored it at Monteverdi. Yeah. So people are up to 45 miles an hour when they go down the road. So there's lots of room for a bike lane, for bike safety improvements and to improve the drainage or keep the drainage the way it is. So I would hope that our project to spend this $900,000 would improve bike and pedestrian safety while maintaining the drainage.
I'd like to comment on that too. The last time a big project happened with road paving was Junipero Street. And I walked through there with you and the project manager afterwards, and I was quite dismayed that the project didn't really include opportunities for tree planting, traffic calming, et cetera. And I think that any road projects that we do ought to be responsible about pedestrian safety and traffic calming issues as part of that planning and oversight, because as Councilman Barron said, we don't have sidewalks, and we've got a lot of people driving very fast, and if we can take the opportunity to create even what they call pinch points in some cities, and so on and so forth, to make our streets safer as we're making them better for cars. Sometimes when we make our streets smoother for cars, it creates increase in speed, and then that is not as safe as it should be for pedestrians. So we have a double responsibility during our paving projects to look at how it's impacting pedestrian and bicycle safety. So thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I would say that, a couple of years ago when PG&E repaved 4th, when they replaced the gas line under 4th, they did exactly what we thought they would do, and the traffic has gone up by 10 miles an hour down 4th now. And now 4th is also dangerous to cross from my street, both from the uphill side and the downhill side. And so I think, to Karen's point, Ocean is a straight line down. It's easy to gain speed going down, and in fact, with today's cars, it's easy to gain speed going up as well. So we have these sort of traffic problems sort of all over town on sort of weird roads, and I agree with her that it would be great if we could start thinking about those things as we start to improve the quality of our pavement.
All righty. Well, I'd offer my opinions. One, I'd like to say that I think we're very fortunate to have fund balances. It's something we can discuss. When I first was over at the county many years ago, everybody was siloed over there, and they got to the end of the year and they spent their fund balances radically because they didn't want to contribute it to the betterment of the county as a whole. They wanted to rat hole it for their own personal uses, for their own departments. Now we've got a community that goes ahead and says, okay, we've got excess money because the departments are conscientious about how they spent their money. That says very much about how we look at the community as a whole, working together as different departments, not, planning against, engineering, public works against the library. As far as some of the comments were made about appropriate project sequencing, I think it was maybe Shirley Moon who said, if you want to do the split rail fence, while she may not have a lot of love for that project, still makes sense to do that before you go ahead and do the other problems there. If you're going to get the infrastructure fixed first, let's dovetail those projects together. And then finally, when we go ahead and talk about the ability to use some of our volunteer efforts that are out there, the offers for money and labor, I'd like to go ahead, and I've said this before, I'm getting a little redundant on this topic, but I would like to see it prioritized, that we go ahead and say to our legal counsel that there's a way to go ahead and make this work, whether it's a level of convenience that we seem to be able to do with some other contracts. There's got to be a way that we can go ahead and use these people that are volunteering their labor here as part of their workforce. I don't care what that's going to look like, but I do think it makes a lot of sense to get on that route, rather than saying, well, we got to go out to professional bid on these competitive bids on all these projects. So I'd like to see that handled. And other than that, I do think we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I do think we've done a very, very good job tonight, very collaboratively, collectively, with the community's input. And Fred, you obviously did a great job. Robin, thank you so much. And honestly, Agnes, again, where are you? Congratulations on a job well done. Take the kudos when they come. They're not very often handling around here. So that noted, I think we're done with tonight's work. I look forward to further conversations and discussions. Chip, you've got your directions, I think.
Yes, sir. Great discussion, Council. Thank you so much. I've got copious notes, and we'll be back. We'll be back with you. Thank you all.
All right, great. And I'd rather adjourn in the name of a hypothetical. I mean, it seems to be a little more personal. We actually had a name associated with it. So I think the intention is that when we find out who Chief Fuller's mother-in-law is, it?
Yes, sir.
Mother-in-law's name is, we'll adjourn then. Thank you all very much. Take care. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.